Scott Carey here. Today, I want to continue along with my series on programming for strength training by delving into intermediate level programming. Now, with the way I approach things, the biggest changes when moving from a beginner template to an intermediate template will be an increase in both frequency and intensity. Remember, when it comes to programming, there are three primary training variables that we can manipulate. Frequency, which is how often you do an exercise. Intensity, which is how much weight you use on the exercise as a percentage of your 1 rep max. And volume, which is how much total work you do on an exercise, either in terms of repetitions completed or total pounds lifted. So if you look at my beginner template, you'll see each exercise is done only once a week, which is a pretty low frequency, and the main exercises are done for 5 sets of 5 reps, which is also a very low volume. The intensity is the only variable that changes during the program. It starts off very low and is increased linearly. And because novices are able to make such rapid progress, they should never truly be lifting anything over 85 or 90% of their 1 rep max during the course of the cycle. This program essentially has you doing the bare minimum amount of work required to make consistent and predictable progress. But eventually, the body will become accustomed to this level of stress, and therefore we have to increase it somehow in order to spur further adaptations. My preference at this point is to add a 4th training session to the weekly schedule and bump the frequency of the squat and the bench press from once a week to twice a week. This increase in frequency will also lead to an increase in total weekly volume on these exercises. As the cycle progresses, we'll also begin to tinker a little bit with the rep schemes we use on the main lifts in order to allow us to begin getting some work in at higher intensity levels. As a beginner, this would be unnecessary and probably even counterproductive. But as you gain a bit of experience, it can be quite helpful to start to learn what heavier weights actually feel like and to get some practice using them, because as you start to approach 90% of your 1 rep max and above, it's generally accepted that the technical requirements for lifting these weights are slightly different from lifting weights at lower intensity levels. So let's take a look at the cycle. There are 4 training sessions each week: a main squat day, a main bench day, a deadlift day, and then a secondary squat and bench day. On the main squat and bench days, as well as the deadlift day, we kick off the cycle with a 5x5 done with a pretty light weight, 60% of 1 rep max. From here, we increase the intensity by 2.5% each week and continue with the 5x5 rep scheme up to week 6 of the cycle. Starting in week 7, the intensity will have increased to 75% of 1 rep max, and we drop from 5 sets of 5 reps to 5 sets of 3 reps. We continue in this fashion until week 12, where we hit 5 triples at 87.5%. Now at this point, the goal for the final 3 weeks of the cycle is to work up to a single heavy triple as our top set, and then decrease the intensity by 10% and knock out a few more back-off triples. These are the heaviest weights that you'll be handling during the cycle, working all the way up to a triple with 95% of your pre-cycle maximum in week 15. These final weeks are going to help you peak for hitting new personal bests on the test day. Each of these 3 sessions is also accompanied by assistance work to complement the main exercises. This work is done in a more moderate rep range to help accrue volume and build some muscle and work capacity. The last session, the secondary squat and bench day, starts off with light weights and progresses to moderate weights over the course of the cycle, and is really just a way to let us get in some more high quality work on the main exercises each week. By now, the trainee should have a couple years of experience under his belt, and increasing the total volume of work that he can perform and adequately recover from on the main lifts should start to become a priority. Not only will this help to increase his skill and technical proficiency on the main lifts, but by gradually increasing the total training volume, the body will be able to recover and continue to adapt to the workload without becoming overwhelmed, which will allow for continued progress to be made for years to come. Now that we've gone over the basic template, let's see how the cycle would look using some sample numbers for a hypothetical lifter. Let's assume our hypothetical lifter has been lifting for about 1.5 years, and after going through 4 rounds of my basic beginner cycle, has worked his way up to personal bests of 330 pounds in the squat, 250 pounds in the bench press, and 420 pounds in the deadlift. His progression through the cycle would look like this. As for what can be accomplished with this type of training, many of you are aware of my little sister, Shelly, who's trained for several years under my guidance. We started her off using a version of my beginner programming and eventually transitioned her over to my intermediate programming, just like what you see in this video. After only 3 total years of training, Shelly has squatted 300 pounds, bench pressed 140 pounds for 5 reps, and deadlifted 350 pounds, all at a body weight of 140 pounds. She has also deadlifted 320 pounds for a set of 5. Here's Shelly pulling her big 350 pound deadlift. There it is, there it is.
Motherfuckers!
Good job. As you can see, the results from this type of programming are quite impressive. The most important thing is consistently putting in the work day in and day out over the course of several years. Really, this intermediate programming isn't very different at all from my beginner programming. It's just a little bit more work doled out over the course of a reasonable but still sufficient progression. And again, an intermediate lifter should be able to run this program for multiple years before they actually have to make real changes to it. By cycling through different main exercises and modifying the rate of progression during the cycle, you should be able to squeeze out every last bit of progress that this program has to offer. At this point, you'll probably be putting up some pretty respectable numbers and can rightly consider yourself an advanced trainee. From here, you have several options as far as how you proceed. These include further increases in frequency and volume, performing a greater percentage of work at higher intensity levels, and even specialization cycles for particular lifts. I'll be covering these advanced programming methods in my next few videos. One last thing I want to stress is that you don't try to rush this process simply so that you can call yourself an advanced trainee. Being a beginner or an intermediate is the best thing in the world. As I said in the last video, there's no point in doing more work than is necessary to drive progress, as doing so limits your options down the road. So if you're still making progress on the beginner cycle, don't move on to the intermediate cycle. And if you're still making progress on the intermediate cycle, don't move on to an advanced one. Everybody is different, but most people will be able to remain in each phase of programming longer than they think they can or even should be. The lifter I featured in my last video had a 415 pound deadlift at a body weight of around 175 pounds. Yet I would have still classified him as a beginner during this time, and he would have been able to continue to make substantial progress on that minimalist program. But people don't want to consider themselves beginners even when they still are. And for some reason, the basic tried and true linear progression gets shit on all over the internet, even though it's produced some of the strongest men to ever walk the earth. And most people would do well to stick with it for longer than they do. When I last trained Shelly, she could have probably put up an 800 or 850 pound powerlifting total while making weight in the 132 class, and she was still making great progress on the intermediate programming. So don't rush through it. Getting through these first 2 phases of your training career properly is going to take several years, at least 5 and possibly even more. So dig in. You have the rest of your life to be advanced. And honestly, it's not all it's cracked up to be anyway, unless stalling for months at a time sounds appealing to you. But we'll get to that later. Anyway, that's all I got for now, guys. If you enjoy the content I produce, please be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Every like and every sub goes a long way to helping the channel grow, and it puts a smile on my face every time, so I really appreciate it. Anyway, I'll catch you guys next time.